At 0530 hours on the 4th of June, 1942, Lieutenant Howard Ady boarded his PBY Catalina flying boat at Midway Island, embarking on a reconnaissance mission destined to alter the trajectory of the Pacific War. The 24-year-old aviator, a 1939 graduate of the Naval Academy, assigned to Patrol Squadron 23, commanded aircraft tail number 23P6, which rested heavily on the ocean's surface, burdened by enough aviation fuel for a 700-mile sweep. Concealed somewhere within the pre-dawn obscurity, the Imperial Japanese Navy's armada was steadily advancing, a threat that naval intelligence and radio intercepts strongly indicated, even though the enemy's precise location and intended hour of attack remained entirely unknown. The PBY Catalina was engineered strictly for endurance rather than aerial combat. This twin-engine flying boat, distinguished by a parasol wing positioned above its fuselage, cruised at a mere 115 miles per hour, making it a sluggish, unagile, and vulnerable target. However, its remarkable ability to remain aloft for 24 hours, traverse 2,500 miles, and observe any activity within a 50-mile radius under clear skies made it the military's definitive answer to a seemingly insurmountable challenge: locating hostile forces across the immense expanse of the Pacific Ocean before they could detect you. Ady's 8-man crew, which included co-pilot Enan Robert Swan, alongside a navigator, radio man, flight engineer, and 3 gunners, had spent the previous 4 months executing monotonous patrols from Midway, constantly scanning the barren ocean without success. Their excruciatingly repetitive routine involved departing before sunrise, charting straight courses over indistinguishable waters for 15 hours, and returning post-sunset, only to rest and do it all over again. Yet a distinct tension permeated this particular morning, as the installation had maintained a state of high alert for 3 consecutive days, launching every operational aircraft, deploying the entirety of the Marine fighter squadrons, and keeping the B-7 bombers fully armed, because everyone understood an imminent Japanese assault was inevitable, leaving only the timing and vector as perilous mysteries. Ascending to his designated cruising altitude after a 0415 hours departure, Ady steered his craft northwest along a bearing of 315 degrees to investigate an assigned sector that encompassed a 45-degree arc stretching 700 miles from the atoll. His systematic strategy involved tracking outward on a specific heading, pivoting 15 degrees for the return leg, and repeating the process to meticulously scan 22,000 square miles of open sea. Unlike land-based bombers, forced to sustain high velocities and elevations, the Catalina possessed the unique tactical advantage of operating at a sluggish pace near the water's surface, allowing the pilot to descend to 500 feet, reduce engine power to 90 knots, and visually scrutinize the maritime landscape for anomalies, rather than relying solely on rudimentary radar displays or restrictive bond sites. Precisely at 0530 hours, roughly 180 miles away from Midway, the co-pilot suddenly detected several dark plumes of smoke billowing over the horizon's curvature, indicating a massive formation of vessels advancing at maximum velocity. Reacting instantly, Ady reoriented his aircraft toward the disturbance, descending to an altitude of 1,000 feet as the formidable silhouettes of the Japanese armada began to pierce through the early morning mist. The main striking force, comprising 2 aircraft carriers flanked by a formidable escort of battleships, cruisers, and destroyers, finally revealed itself, presenting the exact strategic prize the American aviators had been hunting for months. Wasting no time, the radio man broadcasted the critical contact coordinates, detailing the presence of 2 carriers and the primary enemy formation on a bearing of 320 degrees, positioned 180 miles out, traveling on a heading of 135 degrees at 25 knots. This pivotal transmission, dispatched at 0534 hours, effectively ignited the Battle of Midway, reaching Admiral Fletcher upon the Yorktown at 0630 hours, and Admiral Spruant on the Enterprise mere moments subsequently. In an instant, this synchronized intelligence briefed every American commander operating within the Pacific Theater, confirming the location of the Japanese fleet and signaling that the long-awaited ambush was ready to commence. However, Ady's mission was far from complete, as he was now tasked with trailing the Armada to continuously update Allied forces on the adversary's heading and velocity, a perilous duty complicated by the aggressive launch of Japanese Zero fighters from the decks below. Recognizing that his unarmored flying boat possessed neither the velocity to flee nor the agility to engage these lethal interceptors, the pilot desperately ascended into the dense cloud layer at 4,000 feet to initiate a tense 3-hour evasion tactic. By repeatedly plunging into the obscuring mist, resurfacing miles from his previous position to capture a fleeting glimpse of the warships, broadcasting his observations, and vanishing before the frantically searching Zeros could close in, the cumbersome PBY brilliantly leveraged meteorological conditions and immense patience to shadow the Japanese Navy's most formidable fleet without being destroyed. Following 3 relentless hours of shadowing the enemy, Ady relinquished his tracking duties to a replacement PBY at 0830 hours, eventually touching down at Midway by 1000 hours, only to replenish his fuel reserves and launch into another patrol at 1300 hours. By that time, a ferocious maritime clash had erupted across the ocean, with American carrier-based squadrons devastating the Japanese flotilla, utilizing the precise navigational intelligence supplied by his initial, monumental discovery at 0530 hours. While the ultimate triumph at the Battle of Midway was certainly secured through a complex combination of cryptographic breakthroughs, shrewd tactical maneuvers, extraordinary individual bravery, and sheer fortune, the reality remains that without Ady's flying boat pinpointing the hostile forces, none of those subsequent achievements would have ever been possible. That awkward, unhurried flying boat had miraculously achieved what faster, sleeker machines could never manage, sweeping immense tracts of perilous water to identify a microscopic target and surviving long enough to relay the vital intelligence back to command. Throughout the entirety of the conflict, the PBY embraced this profoundly unglamorous yet utterly indispensable duty, leading the military to establish 93 dedicated patrol squadrons, heavily reliant on these reliable workhorses. With production exceeding 3,000 units by the year 1943, these tireless aircraft spanned the globe from the frigid shores of Alaska to the distant coasts of Australia, and from Pearl Harbor all the way to the Persian Gulf, constantly maintaining their monotonous but critical vigil over the seas. From an engineering perspective based on 1935 standards, the vessel was an absolute marvel, allowing the Consolidated Aircraft Corporation to secure a lucrative military contract by delivering a maritime platform capable of unprecedented operational feats. The aircraft possessed the extraordinary ability to traverse 2,500 miles on a single deployment, remaining airborne for more than 20 hours while supporting a complement of up to 10 crew members, all without ever needing a traditional terrestrial runway. By prioritizing mechanical efficiency over raw velocity, the seaplane coasted along at 115 miles per hour, a pace barely exceeding contemporary automotive traffic. Yet this conservative momentum allowed its dual Pratt & Whitney radial engines to function continuously for a full day, consuming 1,800 gallons of combustible liquid stored within the hull's integral fuel cells, effectively transforming the contraption into a massive, winged fuel reservoir. When you examine the internal engineering of the patrol bomber, universally known as the PBY, you immediately notice that by packing fuel into the wing sections and stuffing every remaining crevice not occupied by men or gear, the designers achieved incredible range. However, this impressive endurance came at a steep operational cost. This flying boat suffered from a sluggish top speed and practically non-existent maneuverability, possessing a turning radius spanning miles rather than feet, which allowed enemy fighters to easily overtake it. Furthermore, the aircraft remained woefully underarmed for aerial engagements, carrying only 3 30-caliber machine guns in its initial iterations and upgrading to 50-caliber weapons later, prompting crews to morbidly joke that their aircraft was simply a mechanized clay pigeon. Yet, as you delve deeper into naval strategy, it becomes clear that the military's primary objective for this aircraft was never direct combat. Rather, its true purpose was unparalleled aerial reconnaissance. Throughout the Pacific Theater, you find that raw intelligence frequently outweighed sheer firepower, because knowing the exact locations, trajectories, and strengths of enemy forces dictated the flow of broader strategic maneuvers. Enduring severe weather conditions that would force other planes to remain completely grounded, these flying boats relentlessly gathered this critical data across countless daily deployments. To sustain the grueling marathon flights expected of them, you will find that the interior layout featured specialized accommodations nestled right behind the main flight deck. Off-duty aviators could catch brief moments of rest in a dedicated bunk compartment, while a remarkably basic galley, equipped with a single hot plate, minimal storage, and 2 stainless steel water beakers, allowed them to heat their standard provisions. Furthermore, you might be surprised to learn that the inclusion of a chemical toilet, an extreme rarity for wartime aviation, proved to be an absolute necessity rather than a luxury during patrols that routinely stretched from 18 to 24 hours. Because refrigeration was non-existent and culinary equipment was severely limited, patrol teams relied entirely on standard-issue canned goods, subsisting primarily on crackers, preserved fruit, and endless tins of Vienna sausages. Yet, as you can easily imagine, during a punishing 20-hour deployment, it was the sheer volume of coffee boiled on that solitary heating element that truly kept the exhausted men functional and alert. Veterans frequently noted that by the 15th hour of a flight, the entire crew would be overwhelmingly fatigued, thoroughly disgusted by their repetitive rations, and battling extreme temperatures. The complete lack of cabin heating turned North Atlantic assignments into freezing nightmares early in the conflict, while the massive observation windows transformed South Pacific flights into sweltering ovens, forcing the men to constantly adapt to deeply uncomfortable conditions. To survive these punishing endurances, the men established strict rotational routines, alternating 3 pilots at the yoke, while the rest of the crew continuously swapped observation posts to maintain maximum vigilance. Even though the deafening roar of the engines and constant turbulence made sleeping in the bunks nearly impossible, the simple ability to brew a warm beverage miles above the ocean served as an immeasurable boost to their collective morale. As you trace their deployment history, the defining strength of this machine was its incredible versatility, because its aquatic takeoff capabilities completely bypassed the need for traditional paved runways. By utilizing nothing more than protected lagoons or natural harbors, the Navy transformed tiny, isolated atolls like Canton Island and Palmyra into unsinkable operational bases that could never have supported conventional aircraft. Further enhancing its tactical value, engineers introduced the amphibious PBY-5A variant, which incorporated retractable landing gear alongside the pure flying boat design of the original PBY-5 model. This critical modification effectively doubled the platform's flexibility, proving absolutely vital in volatile regions like the Aleutians, where unpredictable storms might shut down aquatic landings, or simultaneously leaving concrete airstrips perfectly viable. As you follow the conflict into late 1942, High Command recognized that this incredible range and nocturnal operational capacity could be weaponized for an entirely unforeseen purpose, actively hunting Japanese maritime convoys under the cover of darkness. This bold realization sparked a wave of sheer tactical innovation, directly leading to the birth of the legendary Black Cat squadrons. Throughout numerous contested zones, adversary forces completely dominated the daylight hours, leveraging elite fighter escorts and devastating anti-aircraft batteries to shield their naval assets. However, you will notice that once the sun set, the strategic balance inverted completely, rendering enemy fighters effectively blind and leaving their supply vessels dangerously exposed to sudden airborne strikes. The monumental challenge lay in locating and destroying these targets without the benefit of modern radar systems or advanced navigational technology. Tasked with solving this lethal puzzle, Lieutenant Commander Clarence Taff spearheaded the revolutionary combat doctrines that would eventually define these nocturnal hunters, bringing his unit, Patrol Squadron 12, to the embattled airstrips of Guadalcanal in December 1942. Although American Marines controlled the local airfield, Imperial forces maintained a relentless nocturnal supply chain that you might know as the Tokyo Express, utilizing rapid destroyers from Rabaul to deploy reinforcements, shell defensive perimeters, and escape before dawn. Recognizing that his lumbering patrol planes could successfully intercept these rapid nighttime convoys, Taff initiated a radical, top-to-bottom transformation of his entire squadron. He ordered the standard daytime camouflage of blue, gray, and white to be completely covered in a deeply absorbing matte black finish, painting over everything except a few tiny red serial numbers. By erasing their vibrant national insignias, these massive flying boats effectively vanished against the pitch-black canvas of the night sky. Moving away from the highly predictable grid-like search patterns of daylight reconnaissance, you can see how their new nighttime doctrine relied entirely on stealth, surprise, and calculated aggression. Launching at twilight, the crews would aggressively hunt in known shipping lanes, skimming a terrifying 50 feet above the waves and using the dark silhouettes of nearby islands to completely mask their lethal approach. They discarded their standard anti-submarine loadouts in favor of an erratic arsenal that included torpedoes, heavy bombs, and even hand grenades hurled manually from the observation blisters. In one legendary encounter, a crew even bombarded a surfacing submarine using improvised incendiary devices crafted from discarded beverage bottles and aviation fuel, effectively shattering the sense of security that enemy sailors had previously enjoyed under the cover of darkness. As you delve into the history of the Pacific War, you will discover how ominous, pitch-dark seaplanes would materialize out of the void to strike before melting back into the shadows. Curiously, the Japanese military spontaneously dubbed these raiders Black Cats, completely unaware that the American forces had adopted the exact same moniker. This shared nickname perfectly captured the remarkable capacity of the aircraft to emerge without warning, deliver a devastating blow, and slip away into the night, just like a feline stalking its prey. Patrol Squadron 54, VP-54, widely celebrated as the original Black Cat Squadron, executed what you might consider one of the most devastating nocturnal assaults of the conflict. During the night of February 21, 1943, Lieutenant William Goff and his aircrew identified an enemy destroyer lurking near Kolumbangara Island. Utilizing the silhouette of the landmass to conceal their vector, the aviators crept forward at a perilous altitude of merely 50 feet. Upon reaching a distance of 800 yards, Goff abruptly ascended to his striking height and dropped a pair of 500-pound munitions, scoring direct impacts that obliterated the warship and sent it to the bottom within moments. You must understand that navigating a massive, sluggish aircraft low over the ocean under the cover of darkness presented lethal hazards, entirely independent of hostile fire. Tragic losses occurred frequently due to sensory illusions, equipment breakdowns, and simple navigational miscalculations. In fact, out of the initial 7 consolidated patrol bomber PBY airships dispatched to Guadalcanal, 4 met their doom within just 2 months, and many of these casualties had nothing to do with Japanese defenses. Executing nocturnal missions through poor weather conditions without the benefit of modern electronic guidance systems essentially amounted to managing sheer pandemonium. Throughout 1943, This covert aerial force saw significant expansion as new units were stationed across the Solomon Islands, New Guinea, the Aleutian Islands, and ultimately the Philippines. Depending on the unique environmental challenges you would find in each theater, every division engineered its own specialized combat strategies. Amidst the relentless gloom and mist of the Aleutians, these ebony aircraft prowled for submerged Japanese vessels, while in the Philippine theater, they surreptitiously seeded enemy anchorages with naval mines. Meanwhile, down in the Solomons, their primary objective involved severing the vital barge supply lines connecting the various archipelagos. The peril facing these aviators was unrelenting, as you can see from a harrowing mission flown by a VP-54 crew in September 1943. Right in the middle of an offensive pass, enemy searchlights suddenly illuminated the lumbering PBY, prompting the captain to plunge the plane down to the ocean surface with the throttles pushed to their absolute limits amidst a storm of anti-aircraft fire. The airmen miraculously evaded destruction by tearing straight between a pair of Japanese destroyers, hugging the waves so tightly that the hostile gunners simply could not aim their weapons low enough. In the ensuing chaos, the two enemy warships tragically wound up unleashing their arsenals upon one another. You will notice that the psychological torment inflicted by these nighttime raids proved to be exceptionally potent against enemy forces. Imperial sailors frequently recounted how the pitch-black fuselages rendered the planes virtually undetectable right up until the moment of ordnance release, turning the unmistakable drone of their twin engines into an omen of sheer terror. Frustrated Japanese commanders noted that these incessant nocturnal bombardments were severely crippling logistical networks and devastating troop spirits. Consequently, maritime vessels were forced to operate under strict blackout protocols and deploy additional watchmen, which drastically hindered their overall combat effectiveness. However, you might argue that the most monumental legacy of this legendary flying boat lay not in its offensive capabilities, but in its role as a savior. By the middle of 1943, swarms of Allied planes were traversing massive expanses of the Pacific, and downed aviators confronted horrific fates from hypothermia, predators, or the sea itself if salvation did not arrive swiftly. Ultimately, this sturdy amphibious aircraft evolved into the paramount search and recovery platform for the naval forces, snatching thousands of stranded servicemen from the jaws of death during the global conflict. As you explore the annals of naval history, perhaps the most universally recognized recovery took place on April 18, 1943, involving Captain Eddie Rickenbacker, the premier American fighter ace of the First World War. While conducting a regional assessment, his B-7 aircraft crashed into the Pacific, leaving him and 7 companions drifting helplessly aboard inflatable dinghies for 24 days. Their ordeal ended when Lieutenant William Ady, piloting a PBY assigned to Patrol Squadron 51, VP-51, miraculously located the desperate survivors. Braving 8-foot waves, a highly precarious maneuver that threatened to flip his seaplane, Ady successfully extracted the entire party, exemplifying the countless, uncelebrated, yet life-altering extractions performed daily by these dedicated crews. You will find unparalleled bravery in the actions of Lieutenant Nathan Gordon from Patrol Squadron 34, VP-34, who earned the Medal of Honor for retrieving 15 stranded airmen on February 15, 1944. Following a brutal engagement near Kavieng, where hostile interceptors decimated several American formations, Gordon boldly set his flying boat down right inside the heavily defended harbor. Braving a relentless barrage of enemy munitions, he maneuvered his craft to every single raft, executing 3 distinct water landings under intense fire to ensure no surviving comrade was left behind. You will also discover that the rugged architecture of this seaplane allowed it to touch down in treacherous maritime environments that would have instantly shattered more fragile machines. Because the reinforced underbelly was explicitly engineered to endure violent seas, seasoned aviators could safely navigate 10-foot swells, provided they possessed extraordinary piloting finesse. Whenever the fuselage violently collided with the churning ocean, the sensation was often compared by the air crews to attempting to tame a wild, metallic horse. Nevertheless, the resilient structure consistently withstood the punishing impacts, directly translating to the preservation of countless human lives. As 1944 rolled around, the military bureaucracy formalized these recovery efforts under the moniker of Dumbo missions, drawing inspiration from the famous animated elephant. You would routinely see a PBY circling just outside the perimeter of major offensive operations, remaining on high alert to scoop up any aviators who fell from the sky. This reassuring presence profoundly altered aerial combat dynamics, as fighter pilots fought with significantly greater ferocity and took bolder risks, bolstered by the unwavering certainty that a rescue team was hovering nearby. A brief look at the historical data reveals the sheer scale of their heroism, with these seaplanes extracting well over 2,000 individuals throughout the course of the global conflict. The list of the saved encompassed full bomber complements, solo fighter jockeys, and stranded mariners from obliterated vessels. For every single person pulled from the brine, a PBY team deliberately placed their own existence in jeopardy, touching down in contested territories while enduring anti-aircraft fire and the ever-present threat of catastrophic mechanical or meteorological disaster. Furthermore, the legendary Catalina platform essentially invented the concept of long-distance airborne medical transport. Thanks to its phenomenal operational radius and aquatic landing capabilities, the aircraft served as the perfect vessel for extracting critical casualties from wildly inaccessible outposts. Specially modified planes could comfortably accommodate 8 stretchers, allowing airborne corpsmen to administer vital treatments while soaring back to established medical facilities. For terribly injured troops stranded on distant atolls or crippled naval vessels, the timely arrival of this flying boat genuinely dictated who lived and who perished. You can witness one of the most awe-inspiring medical extractions in the annals of the war taking place during January 1944. A designated crew from Patrol Squadron 43, VP-43, navigated their massive aircraft into a tiny coastal outpost in the Solomon Islands to retrieve a severely injured Marine. To accomplish this, the commander skimmed the jungle canopy along a river estuary barely wider than the plane itself, setting down perfectly in a microscopic clearing before launching back out through the identical perilous corridor. That soldier returned home solely because those aviators dared to execute an ostensibly suicidal maneuver, proving that the vast contributions of these remarkable aircraft extended profoundly deeper than basic aerial reconnaissance. Around the year 1943, engineers equipped modified consolidated PBY Catalina flying boats with rudimentary radar technology, granting them the unprecedented ability to locate vessels and aircraft through the darkness of night or severe weather conditions. Because these upgraded amphibious planes could monitor hostile movements when visual tracking proved entirely impossible, they effectively became the United States Navy's pioneering airborne early warning platforms, a tactical innovation that would prove essential in subsequent military engagements. Operating amidst the relentless mists of the Aleutian Islands, Squadron 5P-63 utilized these radar-enhanced aircraft to hunt Japanese submersibles and maritime traffic. During the 11th of May 1943, these crews successfully directed a naval task force to reclaim Attu Island, supplying critical navigational guidance through condensation so dense that warships remained completely hidden from one another. Had they lacked this vital aerial oversight, the approaching invasion armada would likely have broken formation and suffered devastating vulnerabilities. Beyond American forces, this versatile seaplane saw extensive service across a multitude of Allied militaries throughout the global conflict. The British Royal Air Force deployed more than 600 of these maritime patrol bombers to conduct exhaustive anti-submarine sweeps across the Atlantic Ocean, while the Royal Canadian Air Force launched them from both their eastern and western shorelines to safeguard merchant convoys and actively hunt for German U-boats. Simultaneously, the Soviet Navy acquired 189 units through the Lend-Lease program, dispatching them across the harsh environments of the Arctic and Pacific theaters. Down south, the Royal Australian Air Force relied heavily upon the sturdy amphibious craft to sustain vital communications with isolated coast watchers stationed throughout the scattered islands of the Pacific theater. These perilous supply routes, affectionately dubbed milk runs, involved transporting essential cargo and extracting personnel directly from territories firmly held by Japanese forces. Undertaking these journeys required immense bravery, as the pilots flew solitary missions without escort, possessing only basic defensive armaments, and routinely touched down in hostile aquatic zones. Flight Lieutenant G.H. Hemsworth, an intrepid Australian aviator, completed an astonishing 112 of these treacherous cargo drops, setting a record unmatched by any of his peers. Despite being shot out of the sky on 3 separate occasions, he miraculously survived the entirety of the global conflict. Interestingly, the reliable flying boat also found a distinct role as a commercial transport vessel while the world was engulfed in combat. Because the government had requisitioned most standard civilian airliners for military applications, Pan American Airways pressed these amphibious machines into service to maintain crucial flight paths across both the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans. These extensive journeys shuttled high-priority travelers, essential mail bags, and critical logistical supplies between continents. While enduring an 18-hour transit from San Francisco to Honolulu inside the drafty fuselage offered very little in the way of passenger comfort, it successfully preserved indispensable civilian transit networks when absolutely no alternative aircraft possessed the range to survive the crossing. Manufacturing of the legendary patrol bomber persisted relentlessly until the cessation of global hostilities. The Consolidated Aircraft Corporation assembled 2,400 airframes at their primary facility in San Diego, while Canadian Vickers manufactured 369, and Boeing Canada contributed an additional 362 units. Furthermore, the Soviet Union constructed 27 examples under a licensing agreement, and the Naval Aircraft Factory located in Philadelphia produced 156 customized variants. By the time assembly lines finally halted in 1945, workers had completed over 3,000 distinct airframes, officially cementing the vessel's status as the most extensively manufactured flying boat in aviation history. The ultimate combat sorties, undertaken by United States Navy seaplane crews, occurred on the 14th of August, 1945. Several distinct squadrons were actively patrolling the waters surrounding the Japanese home islands when they intercepted radio transmissions announcing that the Empire had officially agreed to terms of surrender. After diligently finishing their assigned reconnaissance sweeps, the pilots navigated back to their moorings at Okinawa and various other staging grounds as dawn broke on the 15th of August, officially recording the final operational deployments of the iconic aircraft during the Second World War. For these dedicated maritime aviators, the bitter struggle that originally ignited amidst the wreckage of Pearl Harbor had definitively drawn to a close. Following the dawn of peacetime, a significant number of these rugged planes continued to grace the skies for decades. Modest national militaries eagerly purchased surplus airframes to bolster their own defense fleets, whereas commercial aviation enterprises repurposed them to ferry passengers into deeply isolated, rugged environments. Several units were ingeniously modified into aerial firefighting platforms, specifically designed to skim across lakes, scoop up massive payloads of water, and extinguish raging forest infernos. Remarkably, more than 80 years after the prototype initially took flight, a handful of these magnificent machines remain airworthy today, serving as a soaring testament to the incredibly durable engineering that originally secured their legendary reputation. Although this particular flying boat never claimed the title of the swiftest, the most agile, or the most heavily shielded warplane of its era, one could strongly argue that it remained the most strategically indispensable. It successfully located adversarial armadas when all other aerial scouts failed, and it snatched thousands of stranded sailors and downed airmen from the jaws of certain death. The aviators operating these lumbering giants frequently endured grueling 20-hour deployments through tempestuous weather that firmly grounded other squadrons, launching from makeshift aquatic bases devoid of traditional runways. Despite their immense contributions, these maritime crews seldom garnered the celebrated prestige showered upon fighter aces or heavy bomber units, primarily because their duties routinely consisted of enduring agonizingly monotonous straight-line navigations over endless stretches of barren ocean. Yet, whenever they finally pinpointed a hidden enemy task force, boldly landed amidst turbulent swells to rescue freezing survivors, or materialized from the midnight gloom to strike hostile shipping, they profoundly demonstrated that ultimate triumph frequently relies upon tedious, methodical, and unglamorous perseverance. Lieutenant Howard Ady, the very man who spotted the Japanese carrier strike force at the Battle of Midway, safely navigated the remainder of the conflict and eventually retired from naval service carrying the rank of captain. He almost never discussed that pivotal June morning in 1942 when his singular observation fundamentally altered the trajectory of human history. Whenever pressed about the monumental event in his twilight years, he simply insisted that he was merely executing his assigned duties, flying his designated patrol route, hunting for the opposition, and relaying his discoveries back to command. That humble perspective perfectly encapsulated the ethos of these patrol bomber crews, who viewed their monumental achievements not as acts of unique heroism, but simply as their daily occupation. However, when you multiply that steadfast dedication by thousands of aviators traveling millions of miles across desolate waters, you begin to understand exactly how their efforts secured victory in the Pacific theater. Ultimately, this sluggish but profoundly dependable aircraft proved that in the theater of modern conflict, gathering and disseminating accurate intelligence often supersedes the sheer capacity for destruction, leaving a legacy of quiet innovation that fundamentally shaped history's greatest conflict.